to you a brand new show on JKTV where you will get the latest updates and analysis into the situation in Indian-occupied Kashmir.
Modi and the Indian government want the world to believe that all is well in Indian-occupied Kashmir, but that is decidedly not the case. Join us and different guests every Thursday for insight into the latest developments in the Kashmiri freedom struggle.
Good evening, welcome to you. I'm Claire, co-founder of Let Kashmir Decide, human rights activist and a teacher in Scotland. And I'm here tonight with Mary Scully, a political writer and activist. And we work together to raise awareness around the globe for the issue for Kashmir, raise their voice of the human rights atrocities that are occurring. And our aim each week is to come here together, sometimes with guests, sometimes just ourselves, to discuss what's happening in Indian-occupied Kashmir, bring it out to the world, bring it out to Kashmiris that maybe already know or can contribute towards discussions, and bring it out to people in the world that do not know. So we'll different dialogue as we discuss and try and reach the people. So our concern this week and our area for discussion this week is Kashmiri journalists, the arrests, the UAPA arrests that are out there, those that are jailed, and letting the world know and aware and discussing how this is happening, why it is happening, what the rest of the world is doing about it, or what they could do about it. So insight or look first this week into Sajad Gul, that was recently arrested for his covering of a story, which the Indian government authorities regarded as objectionable. So we're obviously concerned about the voice, these voices that are being clamped, and you know, a journalist is not a crime. They are just, you know, sharing the news, and to actually be arrested for that is disgraceful, beyond inhumane. And so Mary and I discussed the issues into that. So Mary, how are you this evening?
Oh, I'm fine, thank you.
Good. Thank you for joining us here again. So it's quite alarming, isn't it, what we see, the pattern of the silencing of all people, of all walks of life and conditioning in Kashmir. But this latest one then is alarming now as we move into the journalists. So what can you tell us about Sajad Gul, you know, who he works for and what's happened?
He's actually quite an admirable and remarkable young man. He's only 26 years old, and he's from a family of laborers. He has 4 brothers and a widowed mother. And if I read the story correctly, his father suffered a heart attack from one of the earlier times a few years ago when he was hauled in for questioning. And I haven't read a report, but I believe the mother is widowed and the father that at some point died. But Sajad is the first person in his family to go to college. He went to the Central University of Kashmir, and I believe that he has a bachelor's degree and is still working on an advanced degree in journalism. He has been working with the Kashmir Walla for a few years as a freelancer and was hired by them full-time last December. But in the last few years, you know, some of the reports are a little bit unclear. I believe that in 2020, he was detained by Indian forces for about a month for reporting that he had done for the Kashmir Walla. And of course, the reporting is about the most important things going on in Kashmir, which are these military operations where young Kashmiris are being killed, where Kashmiris are being abducted and extrajudicially executed and then framed up as terrorists, quote, terrorists. So that's what he'd been reporting on. That is what the news is. So he was hauled in 2020, And then in 2021, in February, there was a first information report filed against him. It's a report filed by the police for alleged crimes. And he once again, he reported on one of these operations, and I can't remember the details of that. I have to look at my notes, but he was hauled in for reporting that he had done. And his family are working class people. They did not have the financial resources for to hire legal counsel. So, being a very courageous fellow, he continued to report. And in October of last year, he filed another report about one of these fake encounters. It's what the news is, it's what matters to Kashmiris. And once again, they called him in for interrogation. He was hired by the Kashmir Walla. And I might add that the editor of the Kashmir Walla, I don't know if I ever say their names right, Fahad Shah, has himself been called in repeatedly, summoned and interrogated for the reporting in the Kashmir Walla. But so he was hired by the newspaper. He's no longer freelancing. And so now when he was arrested for a report. He posted a video on his Twitter account of a protest by family members against the killing of the Indian Army's killing of a young man in one of their military operations, and their claim that he was a terrorist, that the young man killed was a terrorist. And Sajad posted that video, and for that, he's been called in for the same kind of silly charges, spreading fake news, undermining the respect for the state, the sovereignty of the state of India, blah, blah, blah. It's all that kind of stuff. Only this time, he is an employee of the Kashmir Walla, and immediately Fahad Shah, the editor, announced that the paper would provide the legal counsel for Sajad, who remains in jail. So he's a very courageous fellow. And not only is the paper standing behind him, because they themselves are under the gun, and they know that Sajad has been in the what do you call that? They've been hunting him down for a while. So there are many other journalist defense organizations that have come out in defense of him. The Center to Protect Journalists, a very important organization. Reporters Without Boundaries, the Kashmir Press Club has come out. The Indian Press Club came out saying that they were cognizant of the arrest of Sajad Gul. It's cognizant. I don't know what that means. It's not quite the same as
get the dictionary out.
Yes.
And internationally, Mary, are we seeing anything internationally? Anything coming from America or the United Kingdom or any other journalist societies in the world? Are we hearing anything?
I've read a lot of articles about the arrests, the multiple arrests, and the questioning of Sajad. And most of the reporting, and it's very interesting, is done by the Kashmiri News, which is edited by Kazi Shibli, another person who has been called in, summoned in for interrogation, and at one point, a couple of years ago, was held for 9 months for their reporting. And the Kashmir Walla, the best reporting, the most consistent reporting is by those two journals and by a Kashmiri journalist like, once again, I apologize for mispronouncing their names, but Gauhar Jilani has written an excellent article. There are several other journals that have written excellent, but Kashmiri journalists that have written excellent reporting about this arrest. They're coming to his defense, despite the fact that all of them face the same kind of harassment, intimidation, coercion, threats that he has been facing. They've been gunning for him for at least a year and a half, 2 years. So it's so admirable that he continued to do his reporting because, as they say, as Asif Sultan has said, who is also in jail, a journalist, Kashmiri journalist in jail since 2018. Journalism is not a crime. And if India is outraged by this fake news, these reporters, these journalists are reporting what's going on in Kashmir. And if it offends or embarrasses the Indian government, well, that's too bad, because that is the character of journalism is not to flatter and suck up to state power. It is to tell the truth about what is happening on the ground. That's its job. And journalism is not a crime. So I have great admiration for Sajad, for all of these journalists, and for the Kashmir Walla for coming to his legal defense.
And I think, if we look at it from out, it's very easy. I think we've said this before, when you get caught up in the Kashmiri world, a lot of things you become desensitized to them because you keep seeing them over and over again. And it ends up thinking, well, nothing surprises me anymore. But when you stand out with that from an ordinary person's point of view, journalists share us the news. They tell us what's happening.
Yeah.
They share, this is the story, here's what, it's not their point of view. I've seen this motorway crash today, I think his fault. They tell the facts, they state the facts. So he's being penalized for that. People need to realize the fact that they're being penalized for this is because they're opening things that people don't want. India don't want the rest of the world to know about. I mean, I was watching a really good program with Rana Ayub the other night. I mean, I shared one to my post with her. I mean, 15 years she's been a journalist. She writes now with the Washington Post. She has a high profile, and she's done a really good job. I mean, she is now living in Mumbai. I think she has about 4 cases against her that they're trying to bring out against her from various different sources, whether it's the tax office, whether it's something else. And she's now in the stage where she cannot leave Mumbai or the country or go to the airport because she also will be arrested and jailed. And so she's writing in a Western newspaper, the Washington Post, one of the most high-profile newspapers in the world, and sitting here with these on her head, but bravely still writing the facts as she sees them. If they're not there, these people aren't going to be creating these, are they? They're sharing what they see. So it's a disgrace. I mean, can you share a little bit more, Mary, with me about Asif Sultan and his background that that you're aware of?
Yes, he is. There are 2 journalists that still in jail. Many have been called in and had charges filed against them, but those are the 2 that are in jail. Asif was arrested in I can't recall, it was August or September of 2018, and he was arrested for writing a profile on Burhan Wani, the young Kashmiri man who became a guerrilla fighter, and who was murdered by the Indian Army in July of 2016. Burhan Wani's murder set off an uprising in Kashmir that lasted for several months, where the army used massive displays of force, including pellet guns and all sorts of lethal weapons, where thousands were injured, killed, imprisoned. It was a horrific thing, but it was a tremendous uprising of the Kashmiri people. If you reported on social media, if you reported about Burhan Wani, if you showed his image, if you said his name, if you expressed any support, you were thrown out on your ear. There were many of us thrown off, including Saeed Ali Gilani, the 90-year-old Kashmiri leader who died last year. We were all thrown off of Facebook and many off of Kashmir just for mentioning his name, even though there were so many Kashmiris who attended his funeral cortege and his funeral prayers that they had to hold it in shifts. There were reportedly 5,600,000 people, and yet you could not say his name. And so 2 years later, he was killed in July 2016. 2 years later, Asif Sultan wrote a profile about Burhan Wani, a very significant figure in Kashmiri resistance politics. Yes, that's Asif. And for that, he was called in for interrogation, and for that, he remains in jail. He's a young father. He had a very small child. And for that, he remains in jail. He was practicing journalism. And so in our defense, in the work of Let Kashmir Decide, one of the principles in our mandate is to defend political prisoners, including Asif Sultan and now Sajad Gul. Wonderful, brave, courageous journalists.
Absolutely. And as you said, Mary, there's a lot of others out there just now sitting with the threat of that over their heads as well. And obviously with the arrest of the journalists like this is where the Indian government, etc., the army will be hoping that people stop speaking out. It's the same with, like you said, you know, he whose name must not be mentioned. If you mention Burhan Wani anywhere, that's it. Your Facebook's gone, your communication's gone, let alone with the journalists. So it's of real concern. I'm glad you brought up the human mandate, the rights mandate there, Mary, because obviously that's another big avenue of our work. We're recognizing the different voices that are around the Kashmir dispute, where many of them have a dream of their ideology at the end of it. Obviously, what concerns us is that we are seeing these huge human rights abuses, and we need everybody to gather around a human rights issue, which is clearly spelled out in our mandate, which you can find on the Let Kashmir Decide webpage. If you look in there, you'll see the Global Coalition Let Kashmir Decide mandate. We're hoping through our program here that the various guests and people that we have along will be endorsing that, and that what we will do at some point in late spring is to launch it. We did a soft launch back in Kotli and Azad. We felt it very appropriate that it was launched in Kashmir itself. And then what we want to do is go with the next tougher launch, which will have all these names of people behind it, backing it, giving it their support, that we can do a huge press release. And we want as many people. We really need to raise this profile bigger, because it isn't in our media in the way it should be. And then look at the way they're silencing the media in Kashmir. If we don't speak up, how will it ever come out? And Mary, we have to speak up united, don't we? It's not going to do the Kashmiri cause, the future, human rights, respect for others, freedom of voice, justice, civil liberties. It's not going to do that any good, is it, if we're coming at this from different angles and not united?
Yes. You know, one thing I wanted to say was that Kashmiris in many ways pioneered the use of social media to overcome the media blackout and the isolation of their political struggle. They pioneered that in many ways, and which is one of the reasons that the Indian government has collaborates with Twitter Facebook and other social media venues to eliminate and delete thousands of Kashmiri activists. It's almost a wasteland compared to what it was.
Absolutely, because they've had a lot of success in that. And I mean, when I first came into this area, had it not been for all those voices trying to get out using their VPNs, as it were, I wouldn't have known half as much as I do, and they're very valuable. And I guess it is carrying on that, just the same as we had with our Red for Kashmir. It was that Red for Danger, the unity, the voices from Kashmir, help. And we need as many people to unite around the global mandate as possible. And it's the solution through the releasing of the political prisoners, as you said, and all political prisoners, the removal of the troops and fighting for that justice and self-determination. So, Mary, thank you, as always, for your great...
add one thing?
Yeah, please do. Add away. Yeah.
But the Kashmiri photojournalists were really important to understanding that struggle. But now if you go to Twitter, what you see is the Kashmiri police reports saying, very briefly, we have engaged in another military operation against terrorists, and 2 terrorists have been killed, and blah, blah, blah. That's what they want. That's what India wants us to hear about these military operations, that it was terrorists.
Yeah, absolutely.
The news that the Kashmiri journalists.
And it's still, sadly, the narrative, the mainstream narrative in the UK. I would imagine it probably still is in America. So if I start up this discussion with somebody new, near enough, the very first thing that comes out is about Islam extremists. But some of them don't even have an understanding that it's extremists.
Yes.
And then, it's a lot to overcome. So the narrative is that it's a land of terrorists. And, very often here it's seen that the Muslims are to blame, because that's the way the story's told.
Yes.
The whole new, it's not given in its true and proper context. So, yeah, there's a big battle out here, I guess. Part of our job, Mary, if we're raising voice for the Kashmiri journalists, is for us to write and reach out to international journalists, individual journalists, see if we can find any internationally that will look into that and stand up for these, because there's a lot of big name journalists out there that if they saw this and they thought that was going to be happening to them, that would do their best to speak up for that. So we can hope for that. Do you feel, Mary, that there's anything else that you would like to add to what you said, or anything we've missed, or a message for people, out there this evening or for this week until we meet again next week?
Well, only that let Kashmir Decide Coalition and other Kashmiri solidarity activists should really do their best to educate about this repression of journalists, because almost every single one of them have been interrogated, have been held, have had charges filed against them. And I think that we cannot, the arrests of Sajad Gul and holding him in prison heralds what we can expect for other journalists. And so we must defend him and Asif Sultan, and we must really campaign against the repression of journalists and journalism in Kashmir. And we should express our great admiration for those Kashmiri journalists, those many journalists who I'm certain have been threatened and continue to do the work of journalists. Remarkable men and women.
Absolutely, because we wouldn't have known the half of what we know without them putting themselves forward out into this. So, salute to them, and I agree with you, Mary. So, so thank you, Mary, for your discussion again tonight. It's great meeting with you across the pond. And I look forward to talking with you next week.
Yes.
Mary, stay there. Don't go away.
Wait
thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. And as Mary said, please try and get the news out there, the word out there, for anybody that doesn't know about what's happening to the journalists in Indian-occupied Kashmir, for anybody that doesn't know what's happening to Kashmiris, and write, please, to any journalists that you think might be able to help in this instance and bring it to light. So thank you very much, everybody, and good night. Good night, Mary. Bye. Thank you very
much. Good night.
Good night.
Are you there?